everyone, welcome back to Career Curves, where we dive into the ups, downs, and unexpected turns in our professional lives. I'm Megan.
And I'm Carlos. Today, we're talking about something that almost everyone faces at some point in their career-changing paths. Whether it's by choice or circumstance, a career change can be one of the most challenging, but also rewarding experiences. So today, we're going to share real-life stories, practical advice, and expert tips on how to navigate these changes.
Right, Carlos, when we think about career change, it often feels like this massive, intimidating leap. But in reality, it's more like a series of smaller steps. Each one of those steps can teach you something valuable. So let's get into it with our first scenario. This one's about someone who made a huge pivot from being a high school teacher to working in tech.
That's a big shift. Let's call our guest Jean. Jean, thanks for joining us today. Why don't you start by telling us about what made you decide to leave teaching?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'd been teaching high school English for about 8 years, and while I loved working with students, I started to feel like I wasn't growing anymore. I was doing the same lessons year after year, and the challenges of the job were starting to wear on me. But the real turning point was when I started helping out with the school's tech club. I found myself getting really excited about coding and building projects with the students, which was something I had no background in. It just clicked for me.
That's interesting. So, what was your first step when you realized you might want to switch to tech?
Honestly, it started as a side hobby. I began by taking online coding courses in the evenings. Platforms like Codecademy and Coursera were super helpful. I'd spend a couple of hours after school working through lessons. At first, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to make a full career switch. It was more about exploring something new that excited me.
That's a great approach. Often, people think they need to dive headfirst into a new career, but starting small can really help you test the waters. How did you transition from learning on the side to actually making a career out of it?
It was definitely a gradual process. After about a year of self-study, I felt confident enough to take on freelance projects. I started with small gigs, building websites for local businesses. It was a great way to build my portfolio without fully committing to leaving my teaching job. Plus, it helped me see if I actually enjoyed the work outside of a classroom setting.
That's a smart way to go about it. So, at what point did you decide it was time to leave teaching and go full-time in tech?
It was about 2 years into this side hustle. I'd built up a decent portfolio and even started getting referrals from clients. I realized I was spending more time thinking about coding than teaching, and that's when I knew it was time. I decided to pursue a full-time role as a junior developer. It wasn't easy. I took a pay cut and had to start from the bottom again, but it was worth it.
That's a big move, and I'm sure it came with challenges. What were some of the biggest hurdles you faced in making that career change?
Oh, definitely. The biggest challenge was imposter syndrome. Even with all the learning and freelance experience, I still felt like I didn't belong in the tech world. I was surrounded by people who had computer science degrees and years of experience. I had to constantly remind myself that my skills were valid, even if my background was different. Networking was also tough. I had to start from scratch and build new connections in a completely different industry.
I think that's something a lot of people struggle with, feeling like they're not qualified enough to make a big change. How did you overcome that?
I focused on the transferable skills I brought from teaching. For example, lesson planning is a lot like project management, and explaining complex concepts to students helped me in communicating with clients and team members. Once I started seeing how my previous experience added value, I felt more confident. And of course, having a support system helped too. My partner and friends were really encouraging, and I also joined online communities where I could connect with others who were also switching careers.
That's a great point about transferable skills. It's easy to overlook how much your previous experience can contribute to your new role. Let's bring in another guest who has a slightly different experience with career change.
Absolutely. Next up, we have Tom. Tom, your story is a bit different because you didn't choose your career change, it was forced on you. Can you share a bit about what happened?
Sure. So, I was working in the retail industry for about 15 years, climbing the ladder from sales associate to store manager. But then, the company I worked for went through some restructuring and I was laid off. It was a huge shock, especially since I'd been with the company for so long. I suddenly found myself in my mid-40s needing to figure out what to do next.
That must have been really tough. How did you start to navigate that situation?
It was definitely challenging. The first thing I did was take some time to process what had happened. It was important for me to not rush into the next thing out of panic. I took about a month to regroup, assess my finances, and think about what I really wanted. I realized that while I was good at retail, it wasn't something I was passionate about. So, I decided to explore other fields.
That's a smart move, Tom. Giving yourself that time to think must have helped a lot. So, where did you go from there?
I reached out to my network, friends, former colleagues, and even family. I wanted to see what opportunities were out there and get advice. Through those conversations, I got interested in project management. I realized that a lot of the skills I'd developed in retail, like managing teams, scheduling, and customer service, could transfer well into that field. I started taking online courses to get some foundational knowledge and eventually earned a certification in project management.
It sounds like you really took control of the situation. How did you find your first role in project management?
Networking was key. I connected with a former colleague who had moved into a project management role in a different industry. She gave me some tips on breaking into the field and even introduced me to her boss. That connection eventually led to a contract position, which was my foot in the door. It wasn't easy starting over, but once I got that first experience, things started to fall into place.
That's really inspiring, Tom. It just goes to show that even when a career change is unexpected, there's still a path forward if you're proactive and open to learning new things. What advice would you give to someone who finds themselves in a similar situation?
My biggest piece of advice is not to underestimate the power of your network. People want to help, but you have to be willing to put yourself out there and ask for it. Also, don't be afraid to start small or take on temporary roles, they can lead to bigger opportunities. And finally, remember that it's okay to feel lost at first. Career change is a process and it's normal to have doubts along the way.
That's great advice, Tom, and I think it's a perfect segue into talking about the importance of mindset during a career change. Carlos, do you want to introduce our next guest? Sure thing, Megan. Our next guest is Lisa. Lisa's career change wasn't about moving to a different industry, but rather about moving up and reinventing herself within her current field. Lisa, welcome. Can you tell us a bit about your journey?
Thanks for having me. My journey started in marketing. I'd been in mid-level marketing roles for about a decade, working for various companies, but I felt like I had hit a ceiling. I wasn't getting the promotions I wanted, and I started to wonder if I needed to move to a different industry altogether. But instead of jumping ship, I decided to double down and reinvent my role within the field.
That's interesting. Lisa, what made you decide to stay in the same field but pivot your focus?
It was a combination of things. I realized that I still loved marketing, but I was bored with the routine tasks I was doing. I wanted more creativity and control over my projects. So I started looking into areas of marketing that I hadn't explored yet, like digital strategy and content creation. I also noticed that many companies were looking for people with skills in data analysis, which wasn't my strength at the time. I decided to focus on that gap and started taking courses in data analytics.
So instead of moving out of marketing, you essentially upskilled yourself to move up within your field. How did that work out for you?
It wasn't easy. I faced a lot of rejection at first. Companies were hesitant to take a chance on someone who didn't have a lot of direct experience in the areas I was targeting. But I didn't let that discourage me. I kept learning, refining my approach, and, most importantly, networking. I started attending industry conferences and meetups where I met people who were already in the roles I aspired to. I would ask them about their day-to-day work, what skills were most valuable, and how they had advanced in their careers. These conversations gave me valuable insights and also helped me to build relationships that would later open doors for me.
So guys, bye for today. See you soon in next video.